The whiskey sat warm on the bar, smelling too sweet for Harlem. A stranger's hand had touched that bottle. Bumpy Johnson felt it quiet, wrong. Everyone expected gunfire. Then his friend lifted the glass first. The bar was already winding down. The kind of late hour where voices softened and glasses stayed half full. Harlem breathed slower at this time. Bumpy Johnson sat where he always did, back to the wall, eyes forward, hands still. Nothing about his posture suggested concern. But he noticed the whiskey the moment it hit the counter. It smelled wrong. Not strong. Not sharp. Sweet. Too sweet for rye. Too clean for a bottle that had traveled through back doors and busy hands. Bumpy didn't touch it. He didn't need to. Years in Harlem had trained him better than any weapon. When something was meant to harm, it announced itself quietly. The bartender slid the glass closer, smiling a little too hard. A man Bumpy didn't recognize lingered near the door, pretending to wait for someone. Another man stopped talking mid-sentence. Small signs. Enough. This wasn't a shooting. It wasn't a knife. That was the insult of it. Poison was what you used when you didn't want noise. When you wanted the death to look private. Accidental. Like the city. Just swallowed another man whole. Bumpy felt the expectation in the room. Everyone was watching his hands. Waiting for him to stand, to shout, to break something. That's what. The mob thought power looked like rage and spectacle, but Bumpy stayed seated, across from him. His friend leaned in, relaxed, loyal, unaware of the quiet danger sitting between them. He laughed at something small, reached for the bottle without thinking, the way men did around Bumpy's safe, unguarded, trusting the calm he carried. Bumpy opened his mouth to speak. Too late. The glass was already lifted. The room seemed to hold its breath as amber liquid tipped toward lips that had stood beside Bumpy through gunfire, arrests, funerals. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Not like this. Not over a drink. The mob wanted fear. Harlem was about to learn something else. Bumpy Johnson didn't rule Harlem with volume. He ruled it with memory. Every man in that bar had seen what happened when his word was ignored and what happened when it was honored. That was the balance. That was the law. He stood slowly, not because the moment demanded it, but because standing gave the room shape. Conversation stopped. Chairs scraped back just enough to show respect. No one reached for a weapon. They didn't need to. Violence was never the first language spoken around Bumpy. It was the last. The man near the door straightened, suddenly unsure whether he was still invisible. The bartender's smile faded. He wiped the counter that didn't need cleaning. Harlem noticed these things. Harlem always did. Bumpy looked at the bottle again. Same label he'd seen 100 times. Same color. Same weight, but it didn't belong. Someone had wanted him gone without a funeral, without a story. Just a whisper that Bumpy Johnson drank too much and finally paid for it. That was never going to happen. This neighborhood had survived because Bumpy made survival predictable. He kept drugs out of schoolyards. He made sure shop owners closed their doors with money in their pockets. When someone broke his rules, the punishment was precise. Not loud. Not cruel. Final. People trusted that. The mob never understood that kind of power. They thought Harlem ran on fear. They thought poison in a bottle was smarter than a gun. Cleaner. Safer. They were wrong. Bumpy didn't accuse anyone. He didn't raise his voice. He simply asked the bartender where the bottle came from. The answer came fast, too fast. A delivery, a favor, a friend of a friend. That told Bumpy everything he needed. Outside, the street was still alive, music drifting from open windows, laughter echoing off brick. Harlem hadn't changed. That mattered. Whatever happened next would happen quietly, inside, where control still belonged to him. Bumpy glanced at his friend, who was setting the glass down now, his expression tightening, confusion giving way to something darker. Loyalty had moved faster than caution. Bumpy made a note of it. Loyalty was precious and dangerous. He placed one hand on the table, firm, grounding. No one left the bar. Not yet, because in Harlem, when Bumpy Johnson stood still, it meant something was about to be decided. And whatever decision came would ripple far beyond that. Bottle through every back room, every handshake, every deal made in his shadow. The mob had tested his order. They were about to learn the cost. Bumpy Johnson didn't rush to his friend's side. Panic was contagious. He wouldn't spread it. Instead, he studied the room the way a man studies a map, slowly, carefully, knowing every line meant something. The bottle hadn't appeared by accident. Nothing ever did. He asked the bartender to bring the crate it came in. Not loud, not sharp, just a request. The bartender hesitated half a second too long before bending down. That hesitation told Bumpy more than any confession ever could. Fear always showed itself before lies did. The crate was clean. Too clean, no dust, no wear. It hadn't been sitting in storage. It had come straight from someone's hands into Harlem. Direct, intentional. Bumpy knelt beside it, reading the markings like old handwriting. The distributor stamp was real, but that didn't matter. Anyone with money could buy labels. Only one kind of man sent poison instead of bullets. The kind who didn't want a response. The kind who wanted silence. The mob had sent a message. Not just to him, but to Harlem. We can reach you anywhere. Even here. Bumpy straightened and finally looked at the man by the door. The man looked back. For half a second too long, long enough to be seen. Long enough to be chosen. Bumpy nodded once. Two of his men moved without being told. Not fast, not rough. They closed the distance the way inevitability closes, in quiet, steady, undeniable. The man didn't resist. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room already knew he wouldn't be leaving the same way he came in. Meanwhile, Bumpy's friend sat rigid, jaw clenched, the warmth draining from his face. The sip hadn't killed him, not yet, but it had changed the night. Bumpy could feel it shifting, like weather turning. The mob always underestimated loyalty. They assumed men around. Bumpy stayed because they were paid. Because they were scared. Because they had nowhere else to go. They never understood that men stayed because he stood. Between Harlem and chaos, Bumpy leaned close to his friend, finally speaking. Just enough for him to hear. His voice was calm, reassuring. Certain. Don't move, he said. You're not alone. That was the promise. Not protection through violence, but through control. He turned back to the room. No one spoke. No one needed to. This wasn't interrogation. It was confirmation. The bartender knew. The courier knew. Someone higher up had decided poison was safer than a war. They were wrong again, because poison crossed a line. It wasn't business. It wasn't strategy. It was cowardice. And cowardice in Harlem didn't stay quiet for long. Bumpy gestured toward the bottle. One of his men wrapped it carefully, like evidence. Like a confession waiting to be delivered. The mob had sent whiskey. Bumpy Johnson was about to send something. Back something far more difficult to ignore. And this time, Harlem would be watching. The effect didn't come all at once. It never did with poison meant to look accidental. It arrived in stages, small betrayals inside the body. A tightening in the chest. A warmth that didn't belong. A breath that came a second too late. Bumpy watched his friend closely now. Not with panic. With precision. The man had been with him for years. Through arrests that made headlines and funerals that didn't. He was the kind of friend who stood half a step behind. Not because he was afraid, but because he understood position. Tonight, that instinct had betrayed him. The glass trembled slightly as it was set down. A hand went to the table for balance. No one moved to help, not because they didn't care, but because they knew better than to break Bumpy's order. Chaos helped no one. Bumpy crossed the room at last. Each step was measured. No hurry, no drama. The room parted naturally, like it always did for him. When he reached his friend, he didn't touch him right away. He crouched to eye level first. "You with me?" he asked. The answer came in a nod, slow, stubborn, loyal to the end. Bumpy placed a hand on his shoulder then, heavy, steady, a reminder of weight, of presence, of reality. His friend swallowed hard, fighting the fog creeping in. The poison wasn't meant to kill quickly. It was meant to leave doubt, to leave questions, to leave room for denials later. That told Bumpy everything. About the men who sent it. They didn't want to face him. They wanted the city whispering instead. Bumpy stood and turned to the room. His eyes didn't search for approval. They didn't need to. Everyone there understood what had just happened. A line had been crossed that couldn't be stepped back. Over. He gave one instruction, quiet, absolute. Get him air. Now, a chair scraped. A door opened. Night air rushed in, cold and sharp, cutting through smoke and tension alike. Two men helped his friend up, careful, respectful, carrying him like something valuable. Like family. The messenger by the door watched it all, sweat cutting clean lines down his face. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. There was supposed to be shouting, accusations, maybe gunfire. Something that made the poison feel justified. Instead, there was calm that frightened him more than violence ever could. Bumpy walked toward him, stopped an arm's length away, close enough to be felt. The man smelled fear, now raw, undeniable. Bumpy didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten. He simply spoke the truth. "You didn't aim that bottle at me," he said. "You aimed it at Harlem." The man opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Bumpy nodded once. Not in anger, in understanding. He knew the kind of men who sent poison. They always used smaller men to do their thinking, to do their dying. Outside, a car engine turned over. His friend was being taken somewhere safe, somewhere clean, somewhere Harlem trusted. Bumpy watched through the doorway until the car disappeared down the street. Only then did he turn back. The room felt different now, heavier, quieter, united. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about response. And when Bumpy Johnson responded, he didn't do it fast. He did it so it lasted. Bumpy Johnson closed the bar himself. No explanation, no apologies. Just a hand on the door and a look that told everyone the night was finished. Harlem understood that look. When Bumpy shut a door, it stayed shut. The messenger was still there, sitting now, smaller than he'd been an hour earlier. The kind of man who realized too late that he'd been used as proof, not protection. Bumpy took the chair across from him, sat down, leaned back. Silence stretched. Long enough to become uncomfortable. Long enough for the man's breathing to give him away. "You're going to walk out of here," Bumpy said at last, calm, even. "And you're going to tell them exactly what you saw." The man nodded quickly. Too quickly. Bumpy corrected him with a raised finger. Just one. Slow. The man swallowed. Tried again. This time, steadier. Bumpy leaned forward. Not close enough to threaten. Close enough to be unavoidable. "You tell them I know who touched the bottle. You tell them I know who paid for it. And you tell them Harlem noticed. No anger. No flourish. Just facts." Delivered like a verdict. The man waited for more. A demand. A beating. A gun. Something he could understand. It didn't come. That was the punishment. because now he had to carry the message himself. Had to walk into rooms where men pretended not to be afraid. Had to explain how poison didn't work. How quiet didn't win. How Bumpy Johnson didn't even raise his voice. Bumpy stood. The decision was already finished. As the man was escorted out, Bumpy turned to his remaining people. His instructions were few, precise. A doctor was called. A bottle was delivered to the right hands. Names were written down not to be shouted, but to be remembered. The mob would hear soon enough. Not through headlines, through delays. Through doors that stopped opening. Through men who suddenly found Harlem less welcoming than it used to be. No shots were fired that night, but something was taken. The illusion that Bumpy could be handled quietly. The belief that his power depended on violence. The hope that fear could replace respect. Bumpy stepped back into the street. The air was cold, clear. Harlem moved around him like it always had, alive, watching, steady. Somewhere across the river, men would be pouring drinks soon, thinking themselves clever. Thinking poison had been a warning. They would learn differently, because Bumpy Johnson didn't answer threats with chaos. He answered them with consequence. And consequences, when done right, lasted far longer than gunfire. By morning, Harlem had already adjusted. No sirens, no headlines, no rumors that needed correcting. Just a quiet understanding that something had been settled the way it always was, without panic, without spectacle. Bumpy Johnson visited his friend before the city fully woke. The room was dim, curtains half drawn, the smell of medicine replacing smoke and whiskey. His friend was pale but breathing steady. Alive, that mattered. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Loyalty didn't require explanation. Bumpy sat for a moment, hand resting on the edge of the bed, grounding the room the way he always did. When he left, the man slept easier. Outside, shopkeepers opened on time. Kids walked to school. Men nodded as Bumpy passed, not in fear. In recognition. Harlem hadn't lost its balance. That was the real victory. The mob never tried poison again. They didn't need to be warned publicly. The message traveled the way real messages did, through closed meetings, delayed responses, opportunities that quietly disappeared. Harlem stopped being convenient, stopped being soft. Years later, people would still talk about that night. Not about the drink, not about the poison. About what didn't happen. No gunfight, no bodies, no chaos. Just control. That's what they remembered about Bumpy Johnson. When tested, he didn't react, he decided. That when threatened, he didn't lash out, he closed the circle. And when loyalty put itself in danger, he made sure it survived. Power in Harlem was never loud. It was steady. And long after the men who sent that bottle were gone, Harlem still remembered who protected it without ever raising his voice.